Hi, I'm here to pick up my son Milo.
There's no Milo here.
Who picked up my son from school?
Streaming only on Peacock.
I'm gonna need the name of everyone that could have a connection.
You don't understand. It was just the 5 of us.
So this was all planned.
What are you gonna do?
I will do whatever it takes to get my son back.
I honestly didn't see this coming. These nice people killing each other.
All Her Fault, a new series streaming now only on Peacock.
Previously on The Girl in the Pond.
The detectives have located nearly every man who had ever been associated with Hazel, and they have learned that the girl was as vain as a peacock and most coquettish.
Was she prepared to enter a new life in which mementos of the old would have troubled her?
Hazel Drew met a man at the depot. They drove to Averill Park. He returned the livery wagon after midnight.
This is The Girl in the Pond.
Episode 7. Trolleys, Trains, and Wagons.
'Tis the last rose of summer left blooming alone. All her lovely companions are faded and gone.
We're French-Canadian, and the story goes is like one of the first Huffy was captured fighting against the British.
Rich Huffy can trace his family lineage back more than 200 years, to the early 1800s.
He was in Napoleon's army, and back in those days, you had to either go to a prison or get conscripted into the British army. And if you're conscripted into the British Army, you can't fight against France, especially if you're French. So they shipped him over to Montreal, or probably, I'm assuming, Quebec City. And he fought against the Americans in the War of 1812.
After a few years in Quebec, Rich's great-great-great-grandfather moved his family to East Posting-Kill, New York, where Hazel Drew was born. His son, Rich's great-great-grandfather, William Huffy, bought farmland near the peak of Taborton Mountain sometime in the late 1800s.
So we're like flatlanders down here. We moved off the mountain.
Flatlander versus mountaineers. It's a distinction that's existed in Sand Lake for hundreds of years. Rich is in his mid-40s. He actually went to school with Nate and Todd from episode 1. They're all good friends. Rural Rensselaer County is a small world. Rich grew up on his father's dairy farm in West Sand Lake. The farm is gone, but Rich is still living on the property. In 2017, Rich's uncle called him up, raving about a new book he found. It was called Who Killed Hazel Drew? Unraveling Clues to the Tragic Murder of a Pretty Servant Girl, by an author named Ron Hughes. Rich had never heard the name Hazel Drew before.
But it was my uncle who passed away about 4 years ago. He's the one that kind of brought it to my attention. He's like, I think your great-great-grandfather's in that book. So I bought it.
His great-great-grandfather, William Huffy, was, in fact, in this book, and other books and articles on the topic. And as Rich would come to learn, William played a pivotal role in the case. For it was William Huffy, driving up the Taborton Road with his wife on a hot July night in 1908, who saw 2 men hanging around at Teal's Pond around the time Hazel Drew supposedly died.
But in mid-July of 1908, investigators had not yet heard from the Taborton farmer William Huffy. They were still trying to piece together a timeline of Hazel's last days, hoping that it would shed light on the case, reveal a killer. That's what we're going to do now, too, because the 2 men by Teal's Pond don't really make any sense until we work out a timeline. We only have information on what Hazel was doing starting Friday, July 3rd, 1908, 4 days before she died. Here's what we know. Hazel's employer, Mrs. Carey, told detectives that Hazel had gone out on the evening of July 3rd to see her dressmaker, Mrs. Schumacher. Mrs. Schumacher lived and worked nearby. She told investigators that Hazel came by in the evening and stayed until 11 p.m. She was there, she said, to pick up a bespoke shirtwaist that she'd ordered. Mrs. Schumacher was running behind and hadn't finished it, so Hazel waited. When it was ready, she paid Mrs. Schumacher $3 and left. Hazel then went home and spent the night at her employer's house. On Saturday, July 4th, she and her Aunt Minnie Taylor went to Independence Day festivities at a city park. Then they took public transportation out to Schenectady to visit with family there, and they stayed the night. The next evening, Sunday, July 5th, Hazel and Minnie went back to Troy. They rode a trolley car. The conductor of that car told authorities that he saw Minnie get off at her employer's house, and he saw Hazel get off at hers. The next morning, Monday, July 6th, Hazel quit her job with the Careys. Mrs. Carey said she paid Hazel the remaining $4.50 that she was owed in wages. Minnie Taylor said Hazel came to see her at her employer's house after she left the Careys. It was sometime around 10 a.m. She said Hazel told her that she quit her job and that she was heading to Watervliet to visit a friend. Minnie said Hazel had her suitcase with her when she left.
What Hazel did for the rest of the day and night of Monday, July 6th, is largely unknown. A witness who wished to remain anonymous told the Troy Daily Press that they saw Hazel at Union Station between 11:20 and 11:30 a.m. They knew her and said they had a brief conversation at the time. They asked her where she was going. She said, downriver. The witness said they thought Hazel boarded the 11:30 train to Albany, but they weren't sure. They actually didn't see her get on the train, but she had disappeared from the station after the train had left. If Hazel left on a train to Albany, she was definitely back in Troy by 1 p.m. There's a record of a woman who matched her name and description arranging for a trunk to be picked up at the Carey's house and shipped to the Drew house in South Troy. Some reports say Hazel spent part of the afternoon at the house of a friend named Mrs. E.V. Huntley. Where she spent the night has never been confirmed.
Mark Marshall, the Rensselaer County resident who's been obsessively researching this case for years, has a theory about that.
We don't know where she was,
Okay.
where she spent the night.
Do you have a guess?
Well, we have a guess that it was either at her brother's house or over at F.H. Huntley's house. It was a girlfriend of hers in Watervliet.
Okay.
I think she may have finally gone to Watervliet after she got her trunk taken care of.
Hazel's older brother Joseph lived on 7th Avenue in Troy, on the eastern edge of downtown. Hazel and her sister-in-law, Eva Drew, were close. Remember, Eva had taken care of Hazel while she was sick and staying at her uncle's in Taborton earlier that year. The next verifiable sighting of Hazel comes around 11 a.m. on Tuesday, July 7th, 1908. Two men said they saw her on the street in downtown Troy. Thomas Carey, no relation to Professor E.R. Carey, said he saw Hazel standing along Congress Street. Lawrence Egan said he saw her on 3rd Street. 3rd and Congress was a major intersection downtown at the time. They both knew who Hazel was. Carey said he saw her carrying a suitcase. Union Station is only a 9-minute walk from the intersection of 3rd and Congress. A woman named Mary Robinson said she had run into Hazel at the train station about 20 minutes later. Mary knew Hazel too. They weren't super close, but they were friendly. She said they talked briefly.
She asked me where I was going, and I told her my destination. Then I asked her where she was going, and she said, "Oh, down the river." This was so evasive that I asked her where she was going down the river, and she said perhaps as far as New York. Just then a train was called, and Hazel went to the ticket window and bought a ticket and went out to the train shed.
Mary told New York World reporter William Montgomery Clemens that Hazel had been about to say the name of a person she was going to meet, but she was cut off by the boarding call. After the announcement, Mary Robinson said she saw Hazel boarding the Beltline train, the same train she supposedly boarded the previous day that was headed to Albany.
The Beltline was a route that circled between Troy and Albany. It was scheduled to arrive there by 11:45 that morning. According to newspaper reports, there was a connecting train from Albany leaving for New York at 12:06. Perfect timing. If she'd actually gone to New York. But she didn't go downstate. She went almost immediately back to Troy. Again. We know this because at 1:49 p.m., she checked her suitcase at Troy's Union Station. Why didn't she just go on to New York City from Albany? Why did she come back to Troy? Mark Marshall spent a lot of time analyzing Hazel's movements that afternoon.
So now we know that Hazel was getting ready to go to New York City. We looked into it, and she didn't have any relatives down in New York City or any friends down there. And it turns out that the detectives found out that she was meeting a train conductor in Troy by the name of John Magner.
John Magner. Was he the train conductor that Aunt Minnie had told detectives Hazel met during her trip to New York months earlier? Investigators found his name and address written on a torn-up postcard that they'd found in Hazel's trash at the Careys. Here's a bit from the Times-Union on July 21st, 1908.
Attachés at the Troy Union Station say that for the past couple of months, when Magner's train came in, a young woman always met the train, and Magner talked with her for the 10 minutes his train stayed in Troy.
Could that have been what Hazel was doing those last two times that she took a train to Albany? Meeting Magner there? There's not much physical detail on John Magner in the newspaper reports. The only thing we really know is that he was young, single, and lived on Lexington Avenue in Manhattan. Investigators confirmed he was a conductor on the mail train lines that ran between Montreal, Syracuse, and New York City. When investigators questioned Magner, he denied knowing Hazel. The next day, the Times-Union reported that Magner confessed to having a chaste relationship with a young Troy woman. But that woman, he said, was not Hazel. He told our reporter that the girl's name was Anna LaBelle. She was a clerk at a local dry goods shop, around the same age as Hazel. The reporter found Anna, and she admitted that she and Hazel knew each other, but she wouldn't say more than that. Could John Magner have been that fella Hazel's mother mentioned who dumped her for another woman? And could that other woman have been Anna LaBelle? Now, there's just not enough evidence to make that conclusion, but it's a plausible theory. It's also equally plausible that Magner wasn't a boyfriend at all. Maybe Anna LaBelle introduced Magner to Hazel as someone who could help get her on her feet once she got to New York. And Hazel, for her part, was just trying to lock that in before she headed downstate. Regardless of the nature of their relationship, Mark Marshall says that it gives us vital clues as to why Hazel took that train to Albany, but then came straight back to Troy both times.
Now, Magner's train was called a fast mail train, and it had actually two runs to it, one to Syracuse and then the other one to Montreal. And we figured that Hazel was going to meet him to try and set up staying with him in New York City until she got her feet on the ground and a place to stay. And so the only place that she would know to figure out where John Magner's train was going to be would be to get to Rensselaer Station, which the Beltline went from Troy down through South Troy and into the Rensselaer Station and then over to Albany and then went that way.
So that's a really good explanation for those actions.
Yeah, because if she waited in Troy for John's train to come in and he had the Syracuse run, she wouldn't have caught him. Right. So it was down in Rensselaer. And plus we have another newspaper report that came in from a guy by the name of Peter Ross. He lived in Schenectady and worked for GE. He was on the fast mail train on Monday morning down in New York City coming up, and he reported this to the detectives that in the Rensselaer Station, a girl with a suitcase got on board on the car that was a blonde type, and he said that she matched the description of Hazel. And the conductor, he was sitting in the back of the car, and the conductor asked him to move up to the front of the car because he had business. He had to speak with the girl. And so he did. He moved up to the front of the car, and they went to the back of the car, sat down, and had an intense conversation. And he said that also was John Magner, fit the description of him as a train conductor. So when they got to Albany, Hazel got off the train and took the Beltline back to Troy again.
John Magner was never considered a suspect in Hazel's murder. He had a solid alibi. He was hundreds of miles away working on a train when Hazel died.
We'll be right back.
The decisions made at the state capitol in New York impact all of us, from our property taxes to the cost of health care or our civil rights. It's all really complicated, but I'm here to help you sort through it. I'm Dan Clark, author of the Capitol Confidential newsletter from the Times-Union. Find that at capitalconfidential.com. That's capital with an O. capitalconfidential.com. See you there.
We are always busy here in the Times-Union newsroom, whether it's covering breaking news, writing in-depth features, or giving the latest local sports highlights. There is a lot that goes into what you read in print and online at timesunion.com and on all of our social channels. So join me, Jessica Marshall, every week on The Eagle, a Times-Union podcast. We'll pull back the curtain and go in-depth on the news that we're covering and the award-winning journalists who bring it to you at the oldest and largest newspaper in New York's capital region. Listen to The Eagle at timesunion.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hazel's whereabouts are a little hazy after the 1:49 p.m. suitcase check. There are 6 hours unaccounted for before she was seen again by several verified witnesses on the Taborton Road starting around 7:30 that evening. A flatland farmer named Peter Sipperly came forward to say he thought he saw a woman who matched Hazel's description riding a trolley car towards Sand Lake around 3 that afternoon. Here's the Times-Union's account of it from July 18, 1908.
His attention was attracted to a young woman and a youth of about 19 or 20 years of age sitting ahead of him. He couldn't get a good view of the young woman's face, but the pictures shown him of Hazel Drew caused him to think that the young woman he saw that day was none other than she. The young man with her was tall, slim-built, and had an intelligent face. He was very attentive to the young woman, Mr. Sipperly said, and never took his eyes off her. Mr. Sipperly couldn't give much of an idea as to what kind of clothes the young woman wore, but when he was shown Hazel's hat, he said it resembled the one which she held in her lap.
A horse-drawn taxi driver named John Abel also came forward to say that he'd seen Hazel Drew in Sand Lake at around 7 p.m. He said he saw her get off a trolley car in Sand Lake and started walking up the Taborton Road. The first sighting that investigators took seriously happened around 7:30 p.m. A mountain farmer named Henry Rollman and his wife were traveling down the mountain in a horse-drawn carriage. Rollman said they passed a well-dressed young blonde woman picking berries along the side of the road near the pond. Mrs. Rollman remembered remarking to her husband just after they passed Hazel,
"Such a pretty girl ought not to be alone on the road at that hour. My, but that girl is having a good time with those berries."
The Rollmans did not know Hazel, but investigators were convinced by their description that it was her. When they got home, the Rollmans remembered talking about the girl's hat. Mrs. Rollman said she'd always wanted one just like it. It was a Merry Widow hat, very fashionable back then. A wide brim, black with black plumes. The next sighting was from Frank Smith and Rudy Gundrum. They saw Hazel walking up the road toward Teal's Pond about 10 minutes later, at around 7:40. Up until that point in the investigation, the next known sighting of Hazel was 3 days later, her body floating in the pond. But that was about to change.
That's where Rich Huffy's great-great-grandfather William comes in.
On the way back up, they saw a couple dudes next to the pond that they ended up finding her in.
William and his wife Elizabeth, who went by Libby, were traveling up the mountain toward their home on the evening of July 7th, 1908. They'd been coming home from doing business in Troy. It was a scorcher of a day, and they'd purposefully waited till the evening to travel back, hoping that it would be a cooler ride. Both Frank Smith and Rudy Gundrum and the Rollmans confirmed running into the Huffys along the road south of Teal's Pond sometime between 7:30 and 8 that night. They all knew each other. They stopped to catch up with both wagons for a few minutes. After each conversation, the Huffys continued up the mountain toward Teal Pond and their home.
Now, the Huffys got to the hollow. They stopped there because we found out from the locals around here that it was also known as Piss Hollow.
We were in town historian Bob Moore's Sand Lake office when Mark told us about Piss Hollow. And of course, Bob had a picture to show us. It's a little spot off the side of the road about a half-mile south of Teal's Pond. And naturally, we asked, why was it called Piss Hollow?
And because
horses and their people in charge of them would stop.
Yeah, so the horses can relieve themselves, and so do the men. And so throughout the years of strong urine smell that built up there, the horses probably knew enough that was a place to stop and urinate.
Not surprised by that explanation. Anyway, the Huffys stopped at Piss Hollow for a few minutes to let their horse do its business. Trucking up that mountain was no small task for a horse drawing a carriage. Huffy wanted to lighten the load on the horse a little bit, so he got out of the carriage to walk the rest of the way.
And he was walking probably about 30 feet in front of the horse, and his wife had the reins, so was leading the wagon up. And he said he became startled when he got up on the top of the rise to the hill that led to Teal's Pond and saw a man in a buggy there on the side of the road, half turned into the road.
Huffy told investigators they saw a Concord-style carriage. You know the type. You've probably seen them in movies or museums. It's a small compartment with doors and windows sitting on top of 4 giant spoked wheels. It's all drawn by a horse, and there's a spot up front or on top for the driver to hold the reins. Huffy noticed that the wheels on this carriage were bright yellow. It was fancier than something he'd seen country folk driving. He thought it looked like a rental from Troy. Back then, you could rent buggies like you'd rent a car today. Sitting in the driver's seat of this buggy with yellow wheels was a young man.
And he said the man was dressed in not a black or a white suit, but in between. And he had one of these high collars on with a fancy tie. And he sat in the buggy as if he was nervous, not an experienced driver, with his hands on his knees, with the reins on his knees. And he said that he couldn't have been any more than 25 years old.
And he had blonde hair, right? Like sandy?
Yeah, sandy-colored hair and a cap. And then when they were going past the pond, Mrs. Huffy told her husband to look over on the other side of the pond, and that's where they seen another guy over in the same spot where they found Hazel's hat and gloves, just about 20 feet from the shore, moving around through the bushes looking as if he was looking for something. And he was dressed in a checkered shirt and pants and a straw hat. And so he was on the side of the pond where Hazel's body was actually finally recovered.
Two men, one in the carriage, the other by the pond. William Huffey didn't know these men. He'd never seen them before. They didn't speak as they passed by. He thought their behavior was strange. But they weren't doing anything that screamed, "We just murdered a girl and are trying to cover it up." So William Huffey and his wife continued up the mountain towards their home, minding their business. Huffey didn't immediately go to the authorities after he'd heard a girl had been murdered at the pond several days later. Instead, he told the owner of a liquor store he frequented in Troy the next time he went to the city a few days later. The liquor store owner then told his brother, who owned a saloon down the street, and it was the saloon owner who told one of the detectives, Duncan Kay. Kay went out to Taborton and found William and Elizabeth Huffey. They told him the whole story. This all went down more than a week after the body was discovered at the pond, around July 18th. Roughly around the same time, District Attorney Jarvis O'Brien got those anonymous letters, the ones that said Hazel was picked up by two men in a livery wagon at Union Station on Tuesday, July 7th.
So what does all of this tell us about what happened to Hazel Drew? Well, we now have more solid evidence that she was at the pond around the same time as two men who were acting strangely. One was a nervous-looking man who looked to be about 25, sitting in the carriage that was pulled over by the side of the pond. He had sandy hair and a mustache. And the other, a slightly older man, maybe in his 30s, was seen thrashing around the bushes near where Hazel's body was pulled out of the water. Mark Marshall and Bob Moore think those two men are the murderers.
Obviously, the story of what happened that night and what your ancestors saw was not, it didn't kind of trickle down to you. Obviously, you found out about it externally, but how do you feel about, like, your family was a pivotal witness? Like, what is that? What intrigues you about that?
Well, I think the reason why, and I was thinking about this today, because my father said something that somebody asked him about it before, and they're like, "What do you mean you don't know anything about that? Isn't that like big family story or something like that?"
Rich Huffey says he feels conflicted about not knowing his family lore until recently.
And I almost think, like, back then, not being in the age of media and everything, they were kind of more focused on the day-to-day, putting food on the table, stuff like that. And who knows if it was even something that, like, people were comfortable discussing back then. It was a whole different, what are we talking, 4 generations at this point? And how I feel about it is, quite frankly, I'm so far removed from it. It's a thing, but, they never did solve it.
Yeah. It's a cool story, right? Like, it's something that's intriguing.
Well, not for her.
No. No, of course not. No, I just meant it's kind of like, because it already happened and you had nothing to do with it because your generation's removed. Right. Like, it's like an interesting thing to talk about, right? Or to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess something to bring up at the cocktail party, I suppose.
Next time on The Girl in the Pond.
The detectives have gone in every livery in Troy and Albany. What was regarded as a good clue was found at one stable. A runabout that tallied exactly with the description furnished by Huffey had been rented the night of July 7th, and the liveryman gave the same description of the man who got it as Huffey saw. County Detective Kay visited the man, and he said he had been to Sand Lake on that night, but it was learned he was accompanied by his lady friend.
That's why we didn't buy that story.
We'll learn more about the men seen at Teal's Pond the night Hazel was killed, and why Hazel was on Taborton Mountain in the first place.
I knew she'd never leave without saying goodbye.
'Tis the last rose of summer left blooming alone. All her lovely companions.
The Girl in the Pond is a production of the Times-Union. It's produced by Jessica Marshall and Patrick Tyne. Written and edited by Jessica Marshall. Editorial direction and fact-checking by Erica Smith and Casey Seiler. Production help from Daniel Roberts, Sarah Diodato, and Mike Goodwin. Special thanks to Tony Pallone, Sarah Diodato, Rick Marshall, Steve Hughes, Roebling Harrison, Arlo Harrison, and H. Rose Schneider for lending their voices. Our theme song is The Last Rose of Summer, written by Thomas Moore. Musical arrangement by Matthew A. Streifert. Vocals by Josephine Diodato. Additional music supplied by Lionel Cohen, Francois Couture, and John Alderson via Getty Images.